Just going to start reading, and if anybody comes in, they can go back to the beginning, okay? Or maybe watch on a replay. I'm going to read from True Hauntings. Okay, and welcome, welcome, welcome. This is from Eileen Garrett. She grew up in County Meath, or Meth, whatever, with vivid memories of two invisible children who played with her in the fields of the idyllic Irish countryside. Her interest in the supernatural grew with every passing year, and she was soon acknowledged with possessing exceptional powers of clairvoyance, precognition, and trance mediumship. She became famous in October 1930 when she made spirit contact with Flight Lieutenant H.C. Irwin, the doomed captain of the airship that had just crashed in flames, and learned what had happened. During her lifetime, Elaine Garrett, I mean, Eileen Garrett took part in innumerable seances in Britain and America, and her memoirs, Adventures in the Supernormal, 1968, from which the following eerie wartime episode is taken, helped to earn her the reputation of being probably the best known and reliable psychic in the world. Ooh. It's called A Vision of Tomorrow. Location and date, south of France, 1940. And a couple of these that I picked out to read tonight are pertaining to World War II. One is during and one is right after. In the south of France, in the most desperate early days of the war in Europe, after Munich, and during the evacuation, and during the evacuation of Dunkirk, I was in Europe. Britain had stretched her very life across the Channel and made her offer of national unity with France. The southern country was already crowded with refugees of all types, and a few who had been living there and still stayed on had opened a foyer du soldat and soup kitchen. Never said I could speak French. Throughout the whole of France, resentment again against England moved like a plague. She was secretly collaborating with Hitler. She sold France out. She would fight to the last drop of French blood. I knew that this wild hatred of England had been hatched in Germany, and that it was being propagated by German agents who moved through the French countryside and the French cities, dropping hints, making vague suggestions, asking endless questions, barbed with poisonous innuendo. I watched France swallow this bait, submit to this deception, and I saw the national morale going to pieces day by day. I thought in my heart, could this be possible in France, where the life of the people and the life of the sea and the soil were one life? If this were possible, was this then the beginning of the end of the world, of the reversion of mankind to savagery, of the extinction of the human race? Humanity seemed to be moving towards madness, a madness destined to end in self-destruction. All about one, people were fleeing from an annihilating force that followed. All those other people long ago had fled before the rising water, till there was no longer any land to flee to, and the deluge destroyed them utterly. I don't know why I'm having a hard time talking. I kept myself as busy as possible, but in the privacy of my own room and my own spirit, I brought the situation to an issue, demanding some sign that would enable me to verify my faith in England and justify my hopes for a world of honorable peace. I saw a large room with high windows like a turret, and a man sitting in a chair in a mustard colored uniform from which shoulder straps, buttons, and all insignia had been cut away. The man was unmistakably Hitler. He was fatter than most pictures had made him appear, and tears were running down his soiled and bloated face. As the picture cleared to my perception, another man went out of the room through a doorway. I saw only the back of this second man, a von Stroheim back, with cropped hair and the thick crease of flesh above the collar. This man was no dignitary. He was dressed in a rusty black suit, and I had an impression of him as some kind of an artisan, maybe a concierge. He did not look back as he went out, but his hand cast back into the room with a knife with a short wooden handle and a curved blade. My sight followed the knife as it slid across the floor, and I had the impression of thinking, that's the Russian sickle. But a voice said, no, not Russian. That's an Afghan knife. I looked at Hitler, quote unquote. He sat immobile in his chair, his shorn uniform awry, while tears ran slowly down his cheeks. Then and there I was filled with a transcendent pity, too deep and poignant for any words. Pity that for the life spent in senseless and futile war against its own kind and against the time to which it belonged. Shorn of his flimsy honors, power had gone out from him completely, leaving him a foolish, lonely human creature to the slow, perhaps eternal realization of the crimes he had committed against humanity, against the life and peace of the world. For me, that vision was the key to the assurance that I needed. Through it, I knew within myself, deeper than all desire or hope or reasoning, that Germany would never win the war. Through all the ups and downs of success and disaster that filled the years that followed, I suffered with my kind for the base and heartless cruelties of the war, but never for a moment did I fail to know that in the end, and whatever the cost, the United Nations would be victorious. At times, my family and friends lost patience with me when I tried to ease their anger and their agony over Coventry or Lydas by reminding them of the end. I would mourn over the disasters and loss of life, but within myself, I knew with a constant and steady assurance that Germany was destined to defeat. There is one phase in this experience which I have never been able to translate into understandable terms for my own satisfaction. I do not yet know the meaning of the statement, no, not Russian. That's an Afghan knife. As the war ended in Europe, with Russia's occupation of Berlin, one could easily find a connection between my impression of the Russian sickle and the final downfall of Hitler's Nazi dictatorship, but one will be wise not to make one's own acceptances and rejections among the symbols of such an experience. And it may be that the fate of Germany is bound up with the fate of Asia in some future too far ahead for our minds to penetrate. I just thought I'd read that because of everything going on in the world right now. Now we'll find something a little bit different. Okay, this one is called Under the Influence. Location and date, New York State, USA, 1937. And this is written by Hereward Carrington. He was one of the United States' leading physical researchers for many years, as well as the founder of the American Physical Institute. He was a highly trained amateur conjurer and shrewd observer, which enabled him to expose a number of fake hauntings and several fraudulent mediums in his numerous books. And they give the names of the books. And he traveled in America and Europe. And in this, this is a case that appeared close to home. This is an account of a haunted house in New York State to which he took his wife and two men about town who, he explains, seem more interested in the spirits to be found in bottles than a rather violent ghost troubling a holiday house. On the night of August 13th, 1937, a party of 7 of us spent the night in a reputed haunted house situated some 50 miles from New York City. I had heard of the house from a friend of mine who knew the summer tenant. He had merely told me that the latter had been compelled to move back to the city in the middle of July because neither he nor his wife could secure uninterrupted nights of sleep, and that their servants had all left in consequence of the haunting. He had rented the house until the 1st of October. He thus abandoned it some 2.5 months before he had been obliged to. We knew nothing more about the house than this, except that noises had been repeatedly heard. Our party of 7 visited the house on the night in question. The group consisted of the former occupant, 2 of his friends, 2 friends of our own, my wife, and myself. We also brought with us a dog which had lived in the house while it was occupied, and which, according to reports, had behaved in an extraordinary manner on several occasions. Arriving at the house, we found it dark and locked up. The tenant had some difficulty in entering and turning on the lights. This he finally succeeded in doing, however, and we could then see that the house was spacious and well appointed, and that everything had been left intact. I suggested to the owner that before hearing anything about the house and its history, it would be a good idea to explore it, first of all, from the cellar to the attic, to see that no practical jokers were hidden anywhere, and that no cats, bats, rats, mice, or whatnot were present to account for the disturbances. To this he readily consented, and lighted the house from top to bottom. Examination of the cellar and the ground floor revealed nothing unusual. On the second floor, however, two or three of us sensed something strange in one of the middle bedrooms. This feeling was quite intangible, but was definitely present and seemed to be associated with an old bureau standing against one wall. The noises had been heard by Mr. X and his wife from the large bedroom on the side of the house. Walking along the hall, we came to a door which had escaped our attention the first time we had passed it. "Where does this lead?" I asked. "To the servants' quarters," Mr. X replied. "Would you like to go up there?" "By all means," I said, opening the door. Glancing up, I could see that the top floor was brilliantly lighted and that a steep flight of stairs lay just ahead of me. Leading the way with the others close behind me, I ascended the stairs and made a sharp turn to the right, finding myself confronted by a series of small rooms. Take another sip. "Hi, pet nanny." The instant I did so, I felt as though a vital blow had been delivered to my solar plexus. My forehead broke out into a profuse perspiration. My head swam, and I had difficulty in swallowing. It was a most extraordinary sensation, definitely physiological, and unlike anything I had ever experienced before. A feeling of terror and panic seized me, and for the moment I had the utmost difficulty in preventing myself from turning and fleeing down the stairs. Vaguely, I remember saying aloud, "Very powerful, very powerful." My wife, who was just behind me, had taken a step or two forward. She was just exclaiming, what cute little rooms," when the next moment she was crying, "No, no," and raced down the steep flight of stairs like a scared rabbit. She had not run up or down stairs for more than 2 years because of an injury to her back. But she flew down those stairs. "Hi, Judy. I love you too. Thank you for coming." I'm only going to read this one and maybe one more. I won't be on here long. But thank you. Appreciate it. Trying to get back in the groove. Thank you. May I say just here that both my wife and myself are old-time investigators, quite unemotional and thoroughly accustomed to psychic manifestations of all kinds. My wife is a keen, cautious observer who has sat with many mediums and exposed many frauds. I myself have done the same and also participated in the Palladino seances, where I believed genuine phenomena were occurring, remaining quite unperturbed when materialized hands were pulling me about, passing their fingers through my hair and so forth. All that time, I was dictating to the stenographer precisely how I was controlling the medium, how her hands, feet, and legs were being held, as our report on these sittings will show. I remained throughout quite calm and cool, as I have at innumerable seances and investigations since. But in the present instance, the reaction was most intense and almost more physiological than psychological. It was distinctly a bodily and emotional reaction, accompanied, I must confess, by a momentary mental panic and sensation of terror, such as I have never known before. Two of those following me had this had by this time reached the upper floor, and I called out a few times to my wife. Hearing no response, I descended the stairs to the lower floor to see if she had fainted or was ill. I found her sitting on the porch, breathing deeply and slowly collecting her scattered faculties. She assured me that she was all right and would come up again in a few moments. Her first reaction had been to get into the fresh air. Leaving her, I ascended the stairs and found the others filing down from the upper floor. Every one of them had experienced the same sensation to a greater or lesser degree. My friend GB had likewise experienced the utmost difficulty in swallowing, and tears were running down his face as though he were weeping copiously. All the others were similarly affected. Having no professional medium with us, we decided to sit for a time in the front bedroom on the second floor to see if any sounds could be heard or phenomena of any kind noted. We accordingly arranged ourselves in a sort of circle, prepared the camera and flashlight bulbs, and turned out the lights. We sat thus for perhaps an hour, during which time nothing visible manifested itself, and apart from some dubious thumps on the ground floor, nothing unusual was heard. The distinct feeling of a presence was, however, sensed by two or three of the party. Personally, I did not feel this. I should say here that the two friends of the late tenant, men about town, had looked upon the whole expedition as a sort of lark and had brought with them a bottle of scotch and a bottle of gin, intending to have an amusing evening. Every half hour or so, they would go down to the kitchen and mix themselves a stiff drink. It is interesting to note that these cynics experienced the same sensations as the others, and that they also reported difficulty in swallowing, tears running from their eyes, cold perspiration on the forehead, and other physical symptoms, as did the rest of the circle. After sitting for an hour or so with no concrete results, we decided to sit in the upper room where the original powerful influence had been felt. Accordingly, we ascended the stairs, but this time not a sensation of any kind was to be felt. The room seemed absolutely clear of all influences, clean, pure, and normal. It felt just like any other of the rooms. What I had previously described as a heavy, malign gas instead of a normal atmosphere was no longer there. Nothing unusual was to be sensed by any of us, and a brief sitting in the room produced no results or untoward sensations whatever. After our original inspection of the house and our first violent reactions, the former tenant had told us its history, disclosing for the first time the fact that a suicide had actually been committed on the upper floor, and that these rooms were thought to be the seat of the haunting. We had known nothing of this on our first trip, purposefully asking for no information concerning this history of the house until we had explored it. The dog, which on the first occasion had positively refused to go with us in the upper story, ran up the stairs quite naturally the second time, wagging his tail, prying into all the corners, and behaving as any normal dog would. When we had tried to coax him upstairs the first time, he had growled, planted his feet before him, and refused to go forward a step. The hair on his back had stood up like that on a cat, and he behaved, in short, very much as dogs are supposed to behave in the presence of ghostly phenomena. Just heard now. In the present instance, however, it was factual, and I saw it with my own eyes. It was by this time past 5 o'clock and getting light, so we decided to call a halt and return on another occasion, bringing with us a medium as well as apparatus for recording possible sounds, for testing the air in the upper rooms, and so forth. Unfortunately, the best laid plans, ... One of the friends of the tenant talked, and a brief note appeared in the papers a day or so later, which the owner of the house saw and read. As a result, he positively refused to allow us to visit the house again, and our most persuasive powers proved of no avail. One of the most curious cases of a haunted house I have come across was one which I investigated some years ago in Astoria, Long Island. It's a long story which I must summarize briefly. One morning, a young man called upon me in a very excited state of mind. He told me that he was living in a house in Astoria, and that he had not only heard footsteps stamping up and down the stairs at night, but that he had on several occasions seen a white figure, which had even laid down on the bed beside him so that he could feel its weight, and also the springs of the bed tremble. When he had turned up the light, however, there was nothing there. In addition to this, he had received a series of alleged communications from the spirit of an old man who had lived in that house about half a century before, as well as from other visitants. These communications stated that there was gold valued at several $1,000,000 buried under the house. Greatly excited by this, my young friend had begun to dig, and when my wife and I went over to visit him, we found the cellar filled with earth and rocks, which he had dug up, and a hole more than 30 feet deep, which he had excavated. So far, no treasure had been discovered, but he was anxious to know if I could help him in any way, particularly in solving the mystery of the ghost. I spent several nights in the haunted house, but saw and heard nothing of interest during my visits there. In order to check his story, however, I took with me on 3 occasions amateur and professional mediums to see what their impressions would be. Needless to say, they were told nothing as to the house or its history. The mediums were never permitted to go downstairs until after the sitting, and they knew nothing of any digging operations. I had rather come to the conclusion that the buried treasure was a pure fantasy, and rather hoped that these mediums would say, "There is no treasure here. Stop your digging." Instead of this, however, they one and all agreed that there was a treasure buried under the house, and 2 of them drew diagrams on an alleged tunnel near where the buried treasure lay, which had which had led many years before to an old Dutch church about a mile away, quarter of a mile away. This was curious, since none of these mediums knew one another and no one knew of any such tunnel. This seeming confirmation naturally stimulated the owner of the house to more intense efforts, so that he spent nearly all his waking hours, both day and night, digging. The entire cellar was filled with rocks and earth, which he had excavated. He entirely neglected his business and worked frantically. Wow. The upshot of this bizarre story is something of an anticlimax. After weeks of digging, no treasure had been found, and the authorities somehow got wind of his activities. One morning, they visited the house and stated that he was endangering its foundations. The poor man was compelled to fill in the immense hole he had so laboriously dug, and all ghostly manifestations ceased. Soon after this, I understand, he moved from the house, and I have heard nothing from him since. One strange occurrence, however, did develop. Inquiries revealed the fact that an old Dutch church had actually stood upon the spot indicated, but that it had been demolished in 1883. This, our young friend, an uneducated Sicilian, certainly had no means of knowing. Much of the information given by the mediums was certainly supernormal, inasmuch as they had made statements which were subsequently verified and had drawn almost identical diagrams of passages, excavations, rooms, and so forth, which they had never seen, but which subsequent measurements proved to be correct. So what'd you think about that? Give it a like, guys. Give it a like. Thank y'all. Good one, huh? Yeah, good one. Thank you. We got us a big crowd here tonight. We got us 400 people. See y'all. Bye, Pet Nanny. Bye, Judy, with an I. Oh, love you guys too. Thank you. Nikki gave me this. Isn't that cute? She was just laughing when she gave it to me from a thrift store. And you know what I'm going to do? Kiss it. Because I do. I do that. That's silly, but I don't care. Love you guys. Night. End stream. Thanks for coming by.